The concept of last words before execution has fascinated humanity for centuries. Whether a solemn confession, a final plea for forgiveness, or a chilling statement of defiance, these words serve as a lasting imprint of a person's final moments. Throughout history, last words have been recorded in various forms, from written transcripts to eyewitness accounts, offering insight into the minds of those facing their ultimate fate. Ancient practices and the evolution of final statements. The tradition of allowing condemned individuals to speak before execution dates back to ancient civilizations. In many cultures, a person's final words were seen as an opportunity to confess sins, seek absolution, or express remorse. For example, in medieval Europe, public executions were common, and last words were often delivered before a large audience. Many condemned individuals use this moment to reaffirm their faith, acknowledge their crimes, or warn others against following a similar path. During the era of public hangings, particularly in England and colonial America, last words were sometimes dictated by religious or legal authorities. Prisoners were expected to express remorse and repentance. Some, however, took the opportunity to maintain their innocence, curse their executioners, or even joke about their fate. These statements were often recorded in pamphlets or newspapers, contributing to public fascination with criminal justice and morality. Modern-day last words on death row. With the development of more structured legal systems, the practice of allowing last words continued but became more formalized. In the United States, for instance, death row inmates are often given the chance to make a final statement before lethal injection, electrocution, or other execution methods. Prison officials and witnesses, including journalists, victims' families, and legal representatives, often record these statements for historical and legal records. Last words on death row have ranged from heartfelt apologies to chilling declarations. Some inmates use their final moments to express regret and ask for forgiveness, while others remain defiant, rejecting the justice system that condemned them. There have also been instances where inmates remained silent, refusing to acknowledge the moment. Why last words continue to fascinate? The psychological and emotional weight of last words is immense. They provide a glimpse into the final thoughts of a person who knows they are about to die. For some, these words serve as closure, a way to end their story on their own terms. For others, they are an opportunity to make a statement that will echo beyond their death. The last words of death row inmates have been widely analyzed in books, films, and academic studies. They raise profound questions about justice, redemption, and human nature. Whether seen as an act of repentance, defiance, or resignation, they remain a haunting reminder of the weight of capital punishment and the finality of death. As society continues to debate the morality of the death penalty, the last words of those who face it serve as a powerful reflection of fear, regret, and, in some cases, an eerie acceptance of fate. Throughout history, the last words of death row inmates have ranged from chilling and defiant to remorseful and heartbreaking. Some statements have become infamous, offering a glimpse into the minds of convicted criminals in their final moments. Below are some of the most well-known and disturbing last words from death row inmates. 1. Ted Bundy, executed in 1989, electric chair. Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, was responsible for the brutal murders of at least 30 women across multiple states. Known for his charm and intelligence, Bundy's case captivated the nation. On the morning of January 24, 1989, he was executed in Florida's electric chair. His final words were eerily simple and emotionless. "I'd like to give my love to my family and friends." Despite his gruesome crimes, Bundy showed no real remorse in his last moments. His execution was met with celebration outside the prison, where crowds cheered and set off fireworks. 2. John Wayne Gacy, executed in 1994, lethal injection. John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, was convicted of raping, torturing, and murdering at least 33 young men and boys in the 1970s. Gacy, who performed as Pogo the Clown at children's events, buried most of his victims in the crawlspace of his home. His case remains one of the most disturbing in American history. On May 10, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection in Illinois. His last words reflected his lack of remorse. "Kiss my ass." Even in death, Gacy displayed arrogance and contempt for the justice system, never acknowledging the suffering of his victims or their families. 3. Aileen Wuornos, executed in 2002, lethal injection. Aileen Wuornos, a rare example of a female serial killer, was convicted of murdering 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990. She claimed that the killings were in self-defense against violent clients while she worked as a sex worker. Her life and crimes were later dramatized in the film Monster, 2003, starring Charlize Theron. Before her execution on October 9, 2002, Wuornos delivered an unsettling final statement. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." Her words were cryptic and bizarre, reinforcing the perception that she was deeply disturbed in her final moments. 4. Peter Kürten, executed in 1931, guillotine. Peter Kürten, known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, was a German serial killer responsible for at least 9 brutal murders in the early 20th century. He gained his nickname due to his disturbing practice of drinking his victims' blood. On July 2, 1931, Kürten was executed by guillotine. His last words reflected his morbid fascination with death. "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." His final words showcased his twisted psyche and obsession with death. 5. James French, executed in 1966, electric chair. James French was a convicted murderer who deliberately committed another murder in prison so he could receive the death penalty. Unlike many death row inmates, he welcomed his execution. On August 10, 1966, he was strapped into the electric chair. His final words were darkly humorous. "How's this for a headline?" French fries. His sarcastic and morbid sense of humor remains one of the most infamous examples of last words on death row. The last words of death row inmates offer a rare glimpse into their psychological state in the moments before execution. These final statements can reflect a variety of emotions: remorse, denial, defiance, or even humor, giving insight into how individuals process impending death. By analyzing these words, psychologists and criminologists attempt to understand the mindsets of those who have committed extreme acts of violence. 1. Remorse and acceptance. Some inmates use their final moments to express regret for their crimes, acknowledge their guilt, and seek forgiveness. This type of response suggests a degree of moral awareness and emotional reflection. For example, Timothy McVeigh, the man responsible for the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, recited William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus, which includes the famous lines, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." McVeigh's choice of words suggested a cold acceptance of his fate, but also a belief in personal responsibility, even in death. Similarly, inmates who apologize to their victims' families may be demonstrating genuine remorse or, in some cases, an attempt to find peace before execution. 2. Denial and claims of innocence. A significant number of executed prisoners have used their final words to insist on their innocence. This could indicate an unwillingness to accept responsibility or a genuine belief in their wrongful conviction. For example, Cameron Todd Willingham, executed in 2004 for allegedly setting a fire that killed his 3 daughters, maintained his innocence until the very end. His last words included, "I am an innocent man, convicted of a crime I did not commit. I am ready to die, but I am telling the truth." Later investigations suggested that the arson evidence used against him was flawed, raising questions about whether he was wrongly executed. Such final words highlight the psychological burden of injustice and the desperation of those who feel they have been unfairly condemned. 3. defiance, and lack of remorse. Some inmates meet their fate with hostility, arrogance, or outright defiance, refusing to show remorse or acknowledge their crimes. This often indicates psychopathy, extreme narcissism, or a deep resentment toward the justice system. For instance, John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who murdered over 30 young men and boys, showed no remorse in his last words, "Kiss my ass." This statement reflects his lifelong disregard for human life and his lack of emotional connection to the suffering he caused. Psychologists suggest that individuals like Gacy exhibit antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, which is characterized by a lack of empathy, manipulativeness, and a disregard for social norms. 4. Humor as a coping mechanism. Some inmates attempt to lighten the moment with humor, which may be a psychological defense mechanism to cope with the fear of death. James French, who deliberately committed murder to receive the death penalty, made a dark joke before being executed in the electric chair. How's this for a headline? French fries? This use of humor suggests either an extreme level of detachment from reality or an attempt to maintain control over his final moments. It may also be a form of bravado, masking fear with a display of wit. 5. Bizarre and delusional statements. Some final words are cryptic or nonsensical, indicating possible mental illness or detachment from reality. Aileen Wuornos, the female serial killer executed in 2002, left behind one of the most unsettling statements. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus." June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. "I'll be back." Her words suggest paranoia, grandiosity, or delusions, common traits in individuals with severe personality disorders or schizophrenia. Some psychologists believe Wuornos suffered from borderline personality disorder, BPD, which can cause intense mood swings, paranoia, and difficulty distinguishing reality. In many cultures, last words hold spiritual significance. The condemned are often encouraged to seek forgiveness, pray, or recite religious texts before execution. Islamic countries. In nations following Sharia law, the condemned may be allowed to offer final prayers or ask for forgiveness. In some cases, last words include Islamic declarations of faith, such as saying Shahada, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." Christian traditions. In predominantly Christian societies, last words often include prayers, biblical verses, or requests for absolution. Catholic inmates may receive last rites from a priest before execution. Buddhist and Hindu cultures. In countries like Japan and India, last words may involve spiritual reflection or the recitation of sacred texts. In Japan, where executions are carried out by hanging, inmates are informed only hours before their execution, sometimes limiting their ability to prepare a final statement. Third Asian approaches: silence and strict control. Some Asian countries handle last words differently, often limiting or discouraging them altogether. China. The Chinese government strictly controls executions, and last words are rarely recorded or publicized. In many cases, executions happen quickly after sentencing, reducing the opportunity for final statements. Japan. Inmates on death row are executed by hanging, and they are given little to no advance notice, minimizing their ability to prepare last words. This secrecy is meant to reduce psychological distress, but also reflects a cultural preference for quiet acceptance of fate. North Korea. Public executions in North Korea rarely allow for last words, as they serve as warnings to the public. Those who do speak often proclaim loyalty to the state or, in some cases, try to assert their innocence. 4. Indigenous and tribal perspectives on last words. In indigenous cultures, last words before execution or death often carry deep spiritual and social meaning. Native American traditions. Many Native American tribes view last words as an important rite of passage. Warriors facing execution or death in battle often delivered powerful statements about their bravery, spiritual beliefs, or warnings to their enemies. African tribal justice systems. In some traditional African societies, last words were seen as a way to cleanse the soul before death. Those sentenced to execution might be encouraged to confess their wrongdoings or make peace with their families. 5. Last words in the legal system. While many societies see last words as a personal or spiritual act, some legal systems treat them as formal testimony. Official records. In the U.S., last words are transcribed as part of execution records. In some cases, these statements have been used posthumously to reevaluate wrongful convictions. Denied last words. Some legal systems, particularly authoritarian regimes, do not allow final statements, especially if the execution is politically motivated. Countries like China and North Korea often carry out secretive executions with little to no opportunity for last words. Media and public reaction. In some high-profile cases, last words are broadcast or published, influencing public perception of the death penalty. Statements of remorse can create sympathy, while defiant or chilling last words often reinforce public support for capital punishment. The final words of death row inmates offer a profound reflection on justice, remorse, and human nature. These last statements, whether expressions of regret, defiance, or silence, provide insight into the emotional and psychological state of individuals facing the certainty of death. They also serve as a mirror for society, raising questions about morality, the effectiveness of capital punishment, and the nature of redemption. The complexity of justice. The death penalty remains one of the most controversial aspects of the justice system. While some argue that it serves as a deterrent and ensures justice for victims, others question its fairness, citing cases of wrongful convictions and systemic biases. The last words of inmates who proclaim their innocence, such as Cameron Todd Willingham, highlight the fallibility of the system and the irreversible nature of capital punishment. These cases force society to confront difficult ethical questions. Is justice truly served if there is even a possibility of error? Does execution offer closure, or does it perpetuate a cycle of violence? Remorse and redemption. Some last words revealed genuine remorse, with inmates apologizing to their victims' families and seeking forgiveness. These statements suggest that even those who have committed the most heinous crimes are capable of reflection and regret. This raises an important question. Can people truly change? And if so, should they be given a second chance? The justice system often prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation, but last words sometimes challenge this perspective, showing the complexity of human redemption. Conversely, some inmates show no remorse at all. Figures like John Wayne Gacy, whose final words were, "Kiss my ass," embody a complete rejection of guilt or empathy. Such statements reinforce the belief that some individuals are beyond redemption, justifying the harshest penalties. The contrast between remorseful and defiant last words highlights the vast differences in human psychology and moral awareness. The fear and acceptance of death. The way individuals face their final moments speaks volumes about human nature. Some prisoners accept their fate with dignity, while others resist it with anger or humor. James French's dark joke, "How's this for a headline? French fries?" demonstrates how some use humor as a defense mechanism, masking fear with wit. Others, like Aileen Wuornos, make cryptic, unsettling statements, possibly revealing deep psychological distress. Silence, too, can be telling. Some inmates choose not to speak at all, perhaps out of resignation, fear, or a refusal to acknowledge the system that condemned them. This act of silence can be as powerful as any spoken words, leaving room for interpretation and speculation. A reflection of society. The last words of death row inmates do not just reveal the minds of individuals, they also reflect society's approach to crime, punishment, and morality. In cultures that emphasize confession and redemption, last words often take the form of apologies or prayers. In societies where justice is swift and absolute, such as China or North Korea, last words may be discouraged or silenced altogether. The way we handle final statements speaks to broader values about justice, forgiveness, and the human condition. Final thoughts. Whether seen as acts of defiance, regret, or acceptance, The last words of those facing execution remain a haunting reminder of mortality and justice. They challenge us to question the effectiveness of the death penalty, the capacity for human change, and the weight of final moments. Ultimately, these statements, however brief, leave a lasting impact on victims' families, on legal debates, and on our collective understanding of crime and punishment.